Hello guys, this is part 110 of ASP.NET video series. In this video, we will discuss about loading standard ASP.NET controls dynamically. We will also discuss about simple tips and tricks to maintain the state of dynamically added controls across a post bag. In the previous sessions of this video series, we have discussed about loading user controls dynamically. In this video, we will discuss about loading the standard ASP.NET controls dynamically. What we actually want to achieve, let me show you the presentation slide precisely. That is our goal to achieve. Okay. So what we actually want to achieve is, a user will be presented with a drop-down list. Here, this drop-down list is present on the go to the browser. This drop-down list is present on the web form at design time with two choices. The user can choose to select a city in which the drop-down list if click this, select city, in which case a drop-down list will be displayed, and this drop-down list, the city drop-down list, is dynamically added. This city drop-down list, this city drop-down list is dynamically added to the web form. And then from this dynamically added control, the user can select this city. Here you can select any city. I am selecting Chennai. And then when I click this button, look at this. Upon post back, this drop down is able. Look at this. Upon post back, this drop down list is able to maintain its state. As you can see, state is maintained here, and we have got the value. At the same time, I am able to also retrieve the value from that drop down list. But on the other hand, if the user chooses to enter post code instead of the drop down list, a text box is displayed. Where the user can enter a post code. And when I click the button, look at this. Look at this. Upon post back, the text box is able to retain its state, and at the same time, I am also able to retrieve the value. I have entered the value here, 20441, and I click the button. Look at this. Upon post back, the text box is able to retain its state. Here the state is retained, and at the same time I am also able to retrieve the value from the text box. Upon post back, Okay, the text box and drop down list are dynamically added. The text box and drop down list are dynamically added to this web form. So let's see how to achieve this. So I have web form here. So go to the Visual Studio. I have the web form here, web form 8.aspx. On this web form, at the moment, I have this drop down list. So go to the source code. I have this drop down list. And the list items, there are the list items within the drop down list. If you look at this drop down list, it has got 3 list items. I have 4 list items. I am saying that I have 3. So I need to, okay, there are 3 list items. Why I have this one? Okay, there are 3 list item. Please select first options with the value -1 and the select city where we have specified the value DDL, because for the user to specify because for the user to select the city, we want to display a drop down list. And for enter postcode, we have specified the value TB for text box. Okay, so and then we have also set the auto post back property to true. Means here we need to auto post back property. Let me have this again. Set it to true. So we have also set the auto post back property to true for this drop down list. So obviously when I run this, and then when the user select city, now what we want to do, means save the changes and run it. When the drop down list posts back to the server automatically, we want to add a drop down list. Okay, so let's see how to do that. Okay, if I select from this drop down list, select city, so now what we want to do, when the drop down list posts back to the server automatically, we want to add a drop down list. Okay, so let's see how to do that. So this is the drop down list. Double click at it to generate the event handler. So go to the design and double click. So double click at it, drop down list, and it to generate the event handler. So I am repeating again. So this is the drop down list. We have done that. We have double clicked at the drop down list. We have double clicked at the drop down list and reached to the code behind, and there is the event handler generated. Now if in drop down list 1 the selected value, if the selected value, look at that, if drop down list 1 dot selected value look at that, means go to the source, look at that. In the source, if the selected value is DDL, value is DDL, selected value is DDL, as you can see here. So in the source, if the selected value is DDL, then we want to, dynamically add a drop down list. Okay, so if drop down list 1 dot selected value is DDL, what we want to do? Okay, making a mistake here, remove this parenthesis from here. So if drop down list 1 dot selected value is DDL, what we want to do? We want to create a drop down list object, drop down list object. So drop down list object is DDL. So drop down list DDL is equal to new drop down list. Give it a meaningful ID. Give it a meaningful ID. This object need a ID. And that is going to be what? Meaningful ID DDL1. That is the meaningful ID to this object DDL. So that later we can retrieve the values from the drop down list. Selected value from the drop down list using that ID. So I am going to specify the ID as, let's say, DDL1. ID is specified as DDL1, for example. And then we want to add items, We want to add items, list items to this drop down list. Examples of some cities. So I am going to say ddl dot items dot add. So ddl dot items dot add. Now if you are new to drop down list, we have a video recorded on the basics of drop down list in the previous sessions. In this video series, I would strongly recommend to watch those videos first. But look at this, I want to add a list item here, but there is another method. You can see here, where we can simply add the list item as a string. So I'm going to specify New Delhi is one of the city. So New Delhi. And along the same line, let's add 3 more cities, and I am going to say 3 more cities. What is happening to it? Three more cities. We need to add 3 more cities. One more. Now here we need Mumbai, and then Kolkata, and Chennai. Finally, we want to add this drop down to this web form. Okay, now on this web form, I want the drop down list to be added after this drop down list. Where I need to. Okay. So finally, we want to add this drop down to this web form. Okay, now on this web form, I want the drop down list to be added after this drop down list. So I am going to have a break element. After the initial drop down list, and another drop down list here. We want to add this drop down list dynamically to the web form, and I want to add the city drop down list at this location. city drop down list at this location, okay. So obviously we need a placeholder control here and there. So let me drag and drop the placeholder control. So where is the placeholder control? I think here it is. Double click or drag and drop. So the ID of the placeholder control is placeholder 1. As you can see, the ID of the placeholder is placeholder 1. And then after that we want a button control which the user can click to retrieve the value from that drop down list. So let me go ahead and add a button control. Add a button control, go to the toolbox. Where is the button? Here it is. Okay. So now let's flip to design mode and then to this placeholder. So flip to design mode and to this placeholder control. To this placeholder control, we want to add our drop down list. So I'm going to say placeholder 1. Where is the placeholder 1? Placeholder 1 dot controls dot controls collection dot add. What do we want to add? What do we want to add? We want to add drop down list object. Okay. So done. So on the other hand, else if the drop down list if the selected values is equal to text box, is equal to text box, if the selected value is equal to text box, if the user has chosen to enter the post code, then the selected value will be text box. If the user has chosen to enter the post code, then the selected value will be text box, in which case we want to add text box dynamically. So text box TB is equal to new text box. and then we want to give it an ID. So tb.id tb.id is equal, I'm going to say tb1. I'm going to say tb1 maybe, and then I don't want any kind of text within that, and I want to simply add that to the web form. So placeholder 1, so placeholder 1 dot controls dot add and what we want to add, tb. What we want to add, tb. Text box, tb text box. That's it. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this. First, let me save all these changes and run this at this point, and then see what is the behavior at this point. And then see what is the behavior. Okay, so the web form should load up now. Let me go ahead and select city. Let me select this city. Look at that, I am able to select. I have the drop down list here. I have the drop down list here. On the other hand, if I enter postcode, this is the drop down list I have here. And on the other hand, if I select the enter postcode, look at that, text box is rendered. Text box is rendered. So very fine. But there are problems with this web form as it stands right now. Look at this. Look at this. I select city. City drop down list is rendered, and then I can select the city from the drop down list. Let's say I select Washington. I select Mumbai. Now when I click the button, when I click this button, what should happen? I should retain the values in this dynamically generated text box. In this dynamically generated text box, if I click this button, what should happen? I should retain the values in this dynamically generated text box across a post back. But let me click that and see what is to happen. Look at that. As soon as I click the button, As soon as I click the button, the dynamically generated control is vanished. Dynamically generated control is vanished. And it makes sense. That is because, look at this, when you are actually adding these controls, look at this. When you are adding these controls, dynamically, when the selected index changed is raised for the drop down list 1. When the selected index change is raised for the drop down list 1 control. Now look at this, when the selected index changed here, it is adding them finally. Now look at this. Now look at this, when the selected index changed here, it is adding them finally. Means if I select this, enter postcode, it is adding them finally. Fine. But when I click this button, what is going to happen? The web form will post back to the server. And within the button click event, look at that, and within the button click event, if I double click button, that to generate event handler. So within the button click event, we are not doing anything. Within the button click event, we are not doing anything. And within the page load, where is the page load? Within the page load event, nothing is happening. The controls are added dynamically only. When this event is raised, means when I click the button, obviously drop down list 1 underscore selected index changed event is not raised. Means when I click the button, because we are doing nothing in the button, so when we click the button, obviously drop down list 1 underscore selected index changed event is not raised. So obviously these controls will not be present on the web form. And another thing to keep in mind, the reason why these controls are not persisted. Another thing to keep in mind, the reason why these controls are not persisted across a post bag is because now web form works on a stateless protocol. We have discussed about this in part 2 or 3. I don't remember the part number, but we have discussed this in the previous session of this ASP.NET video series. Web application works on a stateless protocol, so every request is kind of like a new request to the web server, and then the web server is going to recreate an instance of this web form, and all the controls on that web form from the scratch once again. Okay, so obviously when I click this button, it does not know anything about the web browser, does not know about anything about this web form until a new request goes to the web server. On the web server, it is going to recreate, an instance of this web form 8 class. So this web form 8 class will be created page load event will be processed. So this web form 8 class will be created when recreate an instance of this web form 8 class. So this web form 8 class will be created, page load event will be processed, and then in the page load we don't have any code, so nothing is going to happen. But then when within button 1 click event, again we don't have any code. Within button 1 underscore click event, again we don't have any code, so it just renders the web form with that drop down list. The drop down list that we had to design, that we had at design time. The drop down list that we had at design time, which is this specific, drop down list. Okay, but then I select any item. But then I select any item. Within this drop down list that I have here at this point, what happens? Another request goes for web form 8. So it is going to create an instance of this web form again, and then within page load event we don't have any code. Within page load event. We don't have any code. Where is the page load event? Here. We don't have any code here. So nothing happens. But then after that, this selected index changed event, of the drop down list 1 is executed, in which case if you have selected enter post code, means if you enter post code, if you select enter post code, the selected value is text box. The selected value is text box. Here it is. So it is going to create that instance of the text box. It is going to create that instance of the text box, specify an ID and add it to the web form, and that is how we have these controls. Properly generated. That is how we have these controls properly generated. When the selected index changed event of drop down list 1, when the selected index changed event of drop down list 1 is fired. Okay, but then when I click this button, look at that, they got vanished. Okay, so let us see how to, a simple tips and tricks to basically retain the state of these dynamically generated controls across post back, so that we can retrieve values from them and then save it to the database. Okay, so the trick I'm going to follow here is, I'm going to add these controls. I'm going to move these piece of code from drop down list 1 underscore selected index change event to the page load. So go to the Visual Studio, I copy these code and remove from here and take them to page load event. Okay, so that is the first thing that we will do. And then I am going to knock off these conditions. So I am going to knock off these conditions. So knock off these conditions because I want use controls to be generated every time. Okay, and then this is not properly formatted. To properly format them, I am going to select the entire code, and then press Ctrl K and D. That is going to format that automatically for us. So that is formatted properly now. But what I am going to do right now is look at this on the page load event of the web form. These controls are added dynamically. But we don't want them visible when the web page loads up. So I'm going to set the visibility of both the controls to false. So ddl dot visible to false. And along the same line, I am going to set the visibility of the text box also to false. Okay, so we have set the visibility of these controls to false, but then let me run this as it stands right now. Look at that, the moment within the drop down list index change, we don't. First let me run it. Look at that, at the moment within the drop down list once selected, index changed, we don't have any code. Now we don't have any code. All the code we have moved it to the page load event. And what the modification we made both the control visible by setting their visible property to false. So when I select city here, nothing basically. So when I select city here, go to the browser, select city here, nothing basically happens. Why is that? Because there is no code within the selected index changed event of the drop down list 1. But what I want to do right now is to change the visibility of these controls within the page load event. Okay, so what I am going to do here is, if drop down list 1 dot selected value is equal to the selected value is drop down list. So go to the Visual Studio. If what is I am going to do here is, if drop down list 1 dot selected value is equal to the dot selected value is equal to the selected value is drop down list, then what we want to do, we want to turn the visibility on. Visibility turn on. For that drop down list. So ddl dot visible is equal to true. Else if drop down list 1 selected value is text box, selected drop down list 1 dot selected value is text box. Then we want to turn the visibility of that text box. So tb dot visible is equal to true. Okay, so now Okay, so now let's go ahead and run this, and as you might expect, only the visibility of that selected control will be changed. So let me save everything and run this. So let's go ahead and run this, and as you might expect, only the visibility of that control will be changed. Look at this. Now if I select city, the drop down list is shown here. Now if I select the city, the drop down list is shown here. And then if I select enter postcode, then the text box is shown here. If I select enter postcode, the text box is shown here. Now the most important thing to keep in mind here is, look at that. If I am going to enter a postcode, enter a postcode there, and then click the OK, and then click the OK, and then click the button. Look at that. On the post pack, it is actually retaining its state. So I am clicking the button, it is retaining its state, which is very important. Okay, it is maintaining the state. And if I select city, I'm going to select Mumbai. I click this button. Look at that. Across post pack, it is still retaining its state. Means we have this Mumbai as it is when we click this button. So it is retaining its state. Now finally what we want to do on this button click, we want to retrieve the selected value within the drop down list, and the selected value within the text box. Let's see how to do that now. So within the button click event, what I am going to do, so go to the Visual Studio. What is I am going to do in the button click event handler? Look at the ID of these controls. The ID are TB1. Look at the ID of these control, ID TB1. And for the drop down list, the ID is DDL1. For the drop down list, the ID is DDL1. Here it is. Okay, so I'm going to copy these piece of code. From here. So I'm going to copy this piece of code from here, and then when the button click event happens, if the selected value is DDL, which means it is if it is drop down list, then what we want to do, we want to retrieve the value from that drop down list control, So how do I do that? Now another important thing to keep in mind, this drop down list, and the text box controls that we are adding dynamically, we are adding them to placeholder control. Okay, so obviously within the placeholder control, placeholder control, we have to look for the drop down list and the text box control. We have to look for the drop down list and the text box control. So what is I'm going to do here? If the selected value within the button event handler, if the selected value is drop down list 1, if drop down list, I am going to say placeholder 1. I am going to say placeholder 1. Placeholder 1 control. Within that, find a control with ID. Find a control with ID. What is the ID of the drop down list? If you remember, it is DDL1. What is the ID? What is the ID? DDL1 of the drop down list. If you remember, it is DDL1. So this find control method will return the drop down list as a control, but we know that we are getting a drop down list back. So I am going to typecast that to drop down list. So I am going to typecast it drop down list. Typecast is to drop down list. That to drop down list type. I am going to typecast that to drop down list type, and then finally retrieve the selected item text from the drop down list. Finally retrieve the selected item. Selected item dot text selected item dot text from the drop down list. So how do I do that? So from the drop down list selected, I mean dot selected item dot text, and then once we have that value, all we want to do is print that onto the web form, but in reality we may save it to database table. Okay, so along the same line, so what we need to do, print it to the, so to print response dot write. What is happened to it? It is giving an error. SELE selected item. Placeholder 1 dot find control DDL1 dot selected item dot text. What went wrong here? Unnecessary parenthesis. Okay. So along the same line, if the selected value within the drop down list is the text box, so let me copy this. So along the same line, if the selected value within the drop down list is text box, then what do I want to do? Means if the selected value within the text box is drop down list is text box, then what do I want to do? Let me copy. I have copied the piece of code and then paste it here. But if the selected value is text box, we know that we are looking for a control within a placeholder with an ID of TB1, but that is going to be a text box, so we have to typecast that to be it. We have typecast it to, I have to typecast that to be of type text box, and then retrieve the value that the user has typed into the text box using the text property. So remove this. Within the text property, retrieve the value that the user has typed into the text box using the text property, and then print that on the web form, and then print that on the web form. That's it, we are done. Let me go ahead and run this at this moment. So first let me save the changes. I am saving the changes. and run this. And we should be able to know, select city, select city, and select Mumbai from the drop down list, and select Mumbai and click the button. Look at that, I am able to retrieve the value across post back. I retrieve the value across post back, and the control is still maintaining its state. Along the same line, enter postcode. Along the same line, enter postcode. Let me say 20411. I click the button, and it should retain its state across, and we should be able to retrieve the value, as you can see here on the top as well. Okay, and let's do a little bit of cleanliness here. There is no reason why we need this specific drop down list, why we need this drop down list 1 underscore selected index change. So I am removing it from here. There is no reason why we need this specific drop down list 1 selected index changed event handler. So I am going to get rid of that from there. And then also let's remove the event handler, and let's also remove the event handler. Where is the event handler? On selected indexed change. Okay, within the APX page. So I can get rid of these event. Okay, so now the behavior will be exactly the same. Let me save the changes. And run this. Okay, so now the behavior will be the same. Except that we have cleaned it up a little bit, and if you look at the code, it is very simple code. And if you look at this code, it is a very simple code. All you are doing is within the page load, you adding the controls dynamically, and you are setting the visibility to false. And depending on the drop down list selection, and depending on the drop down list selection, you turn the visibility on. For those respective controls. But then in reality, in some of your project, if you don't have, here for the drop down list 1, for the drop down list one, the view state is preserved. The view state is preserved. In some means, in some of your project, if you don't have, here for the drop down list one, the view state is preserved automatically for us, because this control present at the design time, present at the design time. Okay, so its view state is maintained for us across that web form, across a post bag. Okay, but in reality, if you don't have a user interface control which is going to maintain the state for you, which is going to remember what control the user wants, then probably you store that in a view state variable on that page. Okay, and then later when the web form loads up on a post bag, you can retrieve that value from that view state variable, and then decide which control you want to dynamically show, whose properties you want to dynamically change. So to maintain the state of control, to maintain the state of controls across post bag, add the controls in the page load event and set their visibility to false based on the drop down list selection. Here we are showing or hiding the visibility of that control dynamically. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.